The only real difference between him and Basil is that he was small and had a very large henpecking wife.
So I didn't have any problems with saying what I didn't think was funny. No, I don't believe that. Why does he say that?
It was bold, unapologetic, and side-splittingly funny. A sitcom so brilliantly absurd, it became a cult classic after just 12 episodes. Fawlty Towers didn't just push boundaries, it mocked them, marched past them, and then tripped over them with a smirk. But somewhere amid the chaos, one particular scene crossed an invisible line, one that would never be uncrossed. So, what exactly was in that infamous moment that led to the show's quiet disappearance? Stick around as we uncover the scene that brought Fawlty Towers crashing down. The real hotel horror that sparked a comedy legend. It was meant to be just another place to crash. Nothing fancy, just a decent hotel in a sleepy seaside town. The year was 1970, and the Monty Python team had descended on Torquay to shoot Flying Circus. But what they found instead wasn't just accommodation.
So next week's a definite then, is it? Oh, good. Well, that'll be nice, won't it? I mean, we waited for that wall about as long as Hadrian. No, Hadrian.
It was a surreal, borderline absurd lesson in how not to run a hotel. And for John Cleas, it was the birthplace of one of British television's most iconic disasters, Basil Fawlty. Now, imagine this. You walk into a hotel after a long trip, looking forward to rest. Instead, you're met by a man so suspicious and hostile, you start wondering if you're being secretly filmed. That was Donald Sinclair, the real-life manager of the Glen Eagles Hotel, who somehow made paranoia and customer service go hand in hand. He wasn't merely rude, he was theatrically erratic. He treated guests like invaders and questioned their every move, as though each one might be plotting against him. One moment that left the Pythons in stunned disbelief. Eric Idle had briefly left his briefcase in the lobby. Instead of doing what any sane hotelier might, politely asking who it belonged to, Sinclair assumed the worst. Without hesitation, he grabbed the case and lobbed it over a garden wall, convinced it was a bomb. Not exactly a warm welcome, and certainly not the kind of security policy you'd expect from a hospitality professional. But that wasn't an isolated incident. When Terry Gilliam used his knife and fork the wrong way, Sinclair stormed over to correct his table manners as though poor utensil etiquette were a criminal offense. Complaints from guests were often met with open contempt. Instead of solving problems, Sinclair added to them, creating an atmosphere that was as comically unbearable as it was real. John Cleas was baffled and amused. Here was a man so impossibly wrong for the job, so unintentionally ridiculous, that Cleas couldn't help but observe him with a comedian's curiosity. There was something oddly brilliant in Sinclair's disaster class in hospitality. Cleas took notes, literal ones. Years later, with co-writer and then-wife Connie Booth, he would channel all of that madness into a character who would become a television legend. Basil Fawlty, the hilariously dysfunctional hotel manager at the center of Fawlty Towers, was born not from fiction, but from this bizarre reality. Cleas exaggerated the quirks, of course. Basil's tantrums, his endless passive-aggressive jabs, and his tragic inability to handle stress were turned up for comic effect. But the core of Basil, his suspicion, social awkwardness, and talent for offending everyone, came straight from Sinclair. The series itself ran for just 12 episodes between 1975 and 1979.
Gonna have to sew him back on first.
But it left a mark few sitcoms ever achieve. Every chaotic misunderstanding, every meltdown behind the reception desk was a tribute to that bewildering experience in Torquay. Ironically, Sinclair never fully grasped that he had inspired the show. He passed away in 1981, apparently unaware that his misguided management style had been immortalized in British comedy. But while Fawlty Towers gained legendary status, the real story behind its origin remains stranger and funnier than fiction. It wasn't crafted in a writer's room out of thin air. It began with a chance encounter in a town no one expected to remember, inside a hotel no one expected to talk about. And the man who inspired it all? He thought he was running a tight ship, when, in fact, he was captaining the Titanic of customer service. Yet for John Cleas, this was only the beginning. Before Fawlty Towers, before Basil, and before the accolades, how exactly did his journey start? Stay tuned to unravel the full story. From chaos to Cambridge, the making of John Cleas. Long before the Monty Python madness and Basil Fawlty's hotel disasters, John Cleas was navigating the quiet seaside town of Weston-super-Mare. He was the only child of Reginald Cleas, an insurance salesman with a dislike for the family's original surname, Cheese. Thinking it far too ridiculous for an army man, Reginald officially traded Cheese for Cleas in 1923, a decision that would later match the peculiar charm of his son's comic legacy. At school, Cleas was towering over his classmates. Literally. By 13, he was already more than 6 feet tall, his gangly presence a source of attention before his wit ever was. But behind the awkward height and the school uniforms, something else was brewing. His early education at St. Peter's Preparatory School, paid for by a family inheritance, planted 2 essential seeds: a love for language and a sharp eye for human behavior. He wasn't just a clever boy excelling in cricket and boxing, he was already studying the absurdities of life, albeit unknowingly. The classroom, however, wasn't enough to contain his curiosity. A statue prank during his time at Clifton College hinted at the kind of humor Cleas would come to master: dry, visual, and oddly intellectual. He painted footprints leading away from a statue of Field Marshal Haig as if it had wandered off to the bathroom. Juvenile mischief, perhaps, but even then, it was storytelling through farce. Still, not all moments were humorous. When Cleas discovered, at 17, that he had been passed over for a house prefect position despite his academic success, it left a mark. In his own words, it shifted his view of fairness and respect, something that would echo in the satirical lens through which he later examined authority figures and institutions. With university places under pressure due to the end of national service, Cleas had to delay his dream of attending Cambridge. Instead, he returned to his old prep school, not as a student, but as a teacher of Latin, science, English, and history. Ironically, the Latin lessons he once taught would find their way into Life of Brian, where Cleas's character famously corrects the grammar of anti-Roman graffiti. Every odd detour in his path somehow became part of his creative arsenal. Eventually, he claimed his spot at Downing College, Cambridge, to study law. But fate had other plans. At a student fair, the Footlights Theatre Club asked if he could sing or dance. "No," Cleas said bluntly, adding that if there was anything worse than his dancing, it was his singing. "So what do you do?" they asked. "I make people laugh." And that, quite literally, was his foot in the door. At Footlights, Cleas crossed paths with future collaborators Tim Brooke Taylor, Bill Oddie, and the one who would change everything, Graham Chapman. Together, they began crafting the kind of strange, cerebral, and anarchic comedy that would go on to reshape British television. Even after graduating with a law degree in 1963, Cleas's father continued sending him newspaper ads for retail management jobs, just in case this comedy thing didn't work out. Still, one question remains. How did this academically gifted, prank-pulling schoolboy transform into a comedic powerhouse before Fawlty Towers ever aired? Stay tuned to unravel the full story. Fawlty Towers, a brilliant mess of genius and marriage. If you ever wondered how a hotel run by a man on the brink of madness became one of the most beloved sitcoms in British history, It wasn't because John Cleas had a solo stroke of brilliance. Instead, it began with a marriage, not one built to last, but one that sparked creative magic. Cleas and his then-wife, Connie Booth, took a real-life experience so hilariously disastrous it stuck with them for years and turned it into something unforgettable. It all started during a notorious stay at the Glen Eagles Hotel in Torquay, where Cleas found the hotel manager so ridiculously rude and incompetent that it bordered on satire. Most people would just leave a bad review, but Cleas and Booth saw something else: comedy gold. The idea of a short-fused hotel owner tangled in chaos refused to fade. And soon, the seeds for Fawlty Towers were planted. But rather than just make a show about a cranky innkeeper, the duo sharpened every moment with wit, confusion, and characters so outrageous they somehow felt real. When the show first aired on BBC in 1975,
I said I should go! My head! Has it come away? Oh.
it didn't exactly charm the critics. One called it a disaster, confused by its fast-paced humor and absurd scenarios. But the public? They understood. Audiences immediately clicked with the manic energy of Basil Fawlty, Cleas's towering bundle of nerves and fury, alongside the sharp-tongued Sybil, the ever-grounded Polly, and poor, hapless Manuel, who turned every misunderstanding into an explosive mess. What made the show truly stand out wasn't just the slapstick chaos, but the intricate timing and farcical tension in every scene. Each episode was a powder keg of confusion, pride, and barely restrained hysteria. Ironically, for something so beloved, the BBC nearly pulled the plug after just 6 episodes. But reruns and growing word of mouth made executives reconsider. By 1979, 4 years after the first season, a second and final batch of episodes aired. Only 12 episodes were ever made, yet those dozen entries sealed the show's place in television history. Behind the scenes, the story was less cheerful. By the time they began filming the second series, Cleas and Booth were already divorced. Still, they pressed on as creative partners, determined to finish what they started. It was the last time they would work together, but their final act was anything but bitter. Together, they closed the curtain on Fawlty Towers in style, their artistic chemistry unbroken, even if their marriage wasn't. Even now, decades later, the show's humor feels fresh. It's quoted, studied, and still watched by new generations who can't help but laugh at Basil's escalating fury or Manuel's innocent confusion. Fawlty Towers proved that chaos, especially the kind born from two people trying to turn disaster into comedy, can be timeless. And somehow, through that blend of awkward hotel service, frayed nerves, and pure farce, Cleas and Booth managed to give the world a sitcom that never checked out. The lasting genius of Fawlty Towers. Though only 12 episodes were ever made, Fawlty Towers carved out a legacy far larger than its modest runtime. And this is where its magic refuses to fade. When Fawlty Towers premiered in 1975, the response from television critics was more puzzled than pleased. Some dismissed the show as chaotic and incoherent, unable to grasp that the mayhem was precisely the point. But while critics hesitated, audiences locked in. They didn't just get it. They couldn't get enough of it. There was something almost painfully relatable about watching Basil Fawlty fumble through each day, convinced he was in control while the universe clearly had other plans. John Cleas's portrayal of Basil wasn't just funny.
Good afternoon, Mr. Fawlty.
It was a masterclass in barely contained rage and misplaced ambition. Basil wasn't evil or cruel by design. He was simply trapped in a fantasy of refinement he could never quite live up to. That inner tension, his desperate desire to impress upper-class guests while being fundamentally incapable of hiding his own snobbery, turned each episode into a ticking time bomb. But the real brilliance of Fawlty Towers wasn't in the explosions. It was in the way it made every collapse feel both absurd and oddly tragic. Basil wasn't suffering alone. His sharp-tongued wife Sybil, played to perfection by Prunella Scales, knew exactly how to deflate his ego with a single line. Polly, the sensible maid portrayed by Connie Booth, often appeared to be the only adult in the building. And then there was Manuel, the hapless, eager-to-please waiter played by Andrew Sachs, whose constant confusion made every situation more unmanageable and every punchline more explosive. None of it was tidy, and that was the point. The hotel's disasters weren't isolated gags, they were extensions of Basil's inner mess. Beneath the slapstick, the show explored themes of class, insecurity, and human folly. Basil wanted so badly to run a respectable establishment, to be taken seriously, to rise above his station. But the harder he tried, the more everything fell apart. And yet, that mess was meticulously crafted. Each episode, though packed with chaos, was tightly written and perfectly timed. The jokes didn't just land, they ricocheted. The pacing was relentless, the energy unstoppable. It was a kind of comedy that demanded attention and rewarded it generously. Still, despite its brilliance, Fawlty Towers was a gamble. After airing just 6 episodes, the BBC wasn't convinced it was worth continuing. It wasn't until reruns began attracting larger and more devoted audiences that the network gave the green light for a second and final series in 1999. In total, only 12 episodes were made, but in that small number, Cleas and Booth captured lightning in a bottle. Over time, the critics reversed course. What was once seen as a misfire became a gold standard. In 2000, the British Film Institute named it the greatest British TV series of all time. Today, nearly half a century later, Fawlty Towers remains one of the most quoted, adored, and referenced sitcoms in history. And though it was built on miscommunication, mishaps, and mounting tension, its legacy is clear. Some disasters are too good to clean up. But what made one episode, out of just 12, explode into infamy? And why does it still spark debate decades later? Stick around to find out. Fawlty Towers and the chaos of controversy. But even at the height of its success, laughter didn't shield Fawlty Towers from controversy. And one particular episode pushed the line between comedy and offense so far, it almost tore the show apart. It was called The Germans, and from the very start, it was chaos wrapped in satire. Viewers first saw Basil Fawlty, played with perfect absurdity by John Cleas, stumbling through his hotel duties after suffering a nasty blow to the head. Now, Basil was already a disaster waiting to happen on a normal day, but with a concussion? What followed was a tornado of missteps, awkward encounters, and one of the most infamous punchlines in British television history. The trouble began when a group of German tourists checked into the hotel. Basil, barely coherent and desperate not to offend them, issued a firm command to his staff: "Don't mention the war." But true to his character, within moments, he was doing exactly that, and far worse. In his rambling attempt to play host, Basil spiraled into a surreal, fast-talking tirade full of the Second World War references, Nazi comparisons, and then, as if things couldn't get more uncomfortable, a full goose-step march through the lobby with an over-the-top imitation of Adolf Hitler. It was outrageous. It was completely over the top. And for some, it was just too much. British viewers were divided. Many couldn't stop laughing, recognizing that the real target of the joke wasn't the Germans. It was Basil himself. His ignorance, his arrogance, and his total lack of self-awareness were always at the heart of the show's humor. In this case, the war jokes weren't glorifying anything. They were making Basil look like a fool. That was the point. But others, including BBC executives, didn't see it that way. Letters flooded in. Critics accused the show of making light of a dark and painful history. Some called it tasteless. A few even demanded the episode be pulled permanently. And while the BBC didn't ban it outright, the backlash was serious enough that network officials considered shelving the episode for good. In the end, they let it stay, but only after a long and heated internal debate. Across the channel, the response in Germany was a bit more complex. Some German viewers understood the satire and appreciated the way the episode poked fun at British attitudes, rather than at them. They laughed at Basil's foolishness and saw the ridiculousness for what it was. But others didn't find it funny at all. For those with family members who had lived through the war, or worse, died in it, the slapstick portrayal of Hitler and the awkward war jokes felt insensitive and painful. Decades later, the arguments surrounding the Germans have only grown louder. In the age of streaming and global access, old comedies are being re-examined in a new light. Scenes once seen as edgy or ironic are now judged by today's standards, where political correctness and cultural sensitivity matter more than ever. And the Germans didn't escape this wave of re-evaluation. Several streaming platforms removed the episode entirely, while others edited out specific scenes or lines they deemed offensive. This sparked a whole new controversy. Loyal fans were furious. To them, the edits were a kind of censorship that misunderstood the show's purpose. They argued that Fawlty Towers was never about punching down. It was about exposing the flaws in people like Basil, who never realized they were the joke. Even John Cleas, never one to back down from a fight, stepped in. He defended the episode passionately, reminding everyone that satire isn't always meant to be comfortable. In his view, Basil Fawlty was the perfect example of how ignorance and arrogance often go hand in hand, and mocking that was necessary, even if it made some people squirm. The war jokes weren't aimed at Germans, Cleas insisted. They were aimed at the British obsession with the war and at Basil's stupidity. He wasn't wrong. Basil was never a hero. He was petty, snobbish, rude, and often completely clueless. What made him funny was that he never got away with it. His plans always backfired. His attempts at control always collapsed. And in The Germans, his effort to avoid offending his guests turned into one of the most spectacular displays of foot-in-mouth comedy ever broadcast. Still, it's easy to see why the episode struck such a nerve. Comedy, after all, walks a fine line. What one person sees as satire, another might see as cruelty. And when the subject matter is as heavy as World War II, the stakes are even higher. Yet, despite the outrage, the Germans endured. Not only did it remain one of the most memorable episodes of Fawlty Towers, but it also helped secure the show's place in TV history. It proved that even the most beloved comedies aren't immune to criticism, and that sometimes the boldest jokes are the ones people remember the longest, whether they laugh or not. Today, Basil's frantic cry of "Don't mention the war" is etched into British pop culture. It's been parodied, quoted, and debated for generations. And while some networks may try to sanitize it for modern audiences, the original version still lives on, both as a piece of comedy brilliance and a reminder that humor often comes with consequences. The conversation around The Germans hasn't faded. If anything, it's become a case study in how comedy evolves, and how the same scene can be viewed in two completely different ways, depending on who's watching and when. But maybe that's the real legacy of Fawlty Towers. It didn't just make people laugh, it made them talk. It challenged assumptions, exposed ignorance, and showed that sometimes the most ridiculous characters can teach us something if we're paying attention. And no matter where you stand on the episode, one thing is clear. Fawlty Towers never played it safe. It poked, it prodded, and it pushed boundaries. In doing so, it carved out a legacy that's still being discussed and dissected decades later. Behind the scenes, cast clashes and collaborations. Fawlty Towers was chaos bottled up and broadcast to the world. But what happened off-screen was just as wild as what fans saw on it. The slapstick humor, razor-sharp dialogue, and frantic energy that made the series unforgettable didn't just appear out of thin air. It came from a cast and crew who poured everything, sometimes quite literally, into every scene, even as personal struggles simmered behind the laughter. The show's masterminds, John Cleas and Connie Booth, didn't just co-create the series. They were also its emotional core. Cleas played the permanently stressed Basil Fawlty, and Booth played Polly, the calm in the storm. But by the time they began working on the second season in 1978, their marriage had quietly ended. It wasn't a dramatic breakup splashed across tabloids, just the quiet heartbreak of two creative minds who had grown apart. Still, they carried on like professionals, not just tolerating each other, but working in lockstep to produce some of the show's finest episodes. You'd never guess, watching Basil and Polly bicker and brainstorm, that the real-life couple behind them had just separated. As the camera rolled, there was no room for personal baggage. Even when the pressure mounted, the cast never let it seep into their performances. Prunella Scales, who played the fearsome Sybil Fawlty, was a master of turning upper-middle-class sternness into comedic gold. In real life, she was nothing like her character. Kind, thoughtful, and admired across the British acting world. She once shared that Sybil was inspired by women she'd observed who could command a room with just a raised eyebrow and a sharp voice. Her transformation into the commanding hotel co-owner was so complete that even Cleas admitted Sybil's shrill Basil was enough to put the fear of God into him, on screen at least. And then there was Andrew Sachs, whose portrayal of the ever-confused Manuel made him a household name. But behind the lovable foreign waiter was a man who gave everything, sometimes too much, for his art. In one memorable scene, Basil hits Manuel with a frying pan. What most viewers didn't know was that the first take used a real pan, leaving Sachs with a nasty bruise. After that, they switched to a rubber one, but the damage was done, both literally and symbolically. Sachs also suffered minor burns during a fire scene gone wrong, yet he never once complained. With a smile and a shrug, he returned to the set, again and again, turning Manuel into one of the most beloved and physically abused characters in sitcom history. Still, no amount of personal strife or physical mishaps could dull the brilliance of the show. The set might have been filled with awkward silences, ice packs, and private heartaches. But when the cameras rolled, the magic returned. The chemistry among the cast remained electric proof that sometimes the best comedy comes from those willing to laugh through the pain. That strange mixture of tension and teamwork created something timeless. As new generations discover Fawlty Towers, they're greeted not just by brilliant writing and unforgettable performances, but by the quiet, often unseen sacrifices that made it all possible. It's easy to get caught up in the laughter and forget the cost, but perhaps that's part of the show's genius. Beneath the shouting, the pratfalls, and the burned breakfasts was a cast that showed up, gave their all, and left behind a legacy that still stands strong, rubber frying pans and all. But what happens when the man behind the chaos refuses to fade quietly and dares to reopen the hotel doors once more? Keep watching. Beyond the laughs, what became of the Fawlty Towers cast? Still riding the wave of chaos that made Fawlty Towers a masterpiece of British comedy, what followed for its beloved cast proved just as surprising and often more dramatic than anything scripted on the show. At the heart of it all was John Cleas, the brilliant mind behind the eternally stressed Basil Fawlty. After the show wrapped, Cleas didn't just move on, he expanded his comedic empire. From co-writing and starring in A Fish Called Wanda in 1988 to lending his iconic voice to animated blockbusters like Shrek 2 as King Harold, Cleas stayed everywhere you looked. But age hasn't dulled his bite. Even in his 80s, Cleas remains outspoken, unafraid to challenge modern comedy, cancel culture, and anything else he feels deserves a verbal jab. In 2023, he made headlines again by announcing an ambitious reboot of Fawlty Towers, this time co-writing it with his real-life daughter, Camilla Cleas. The revival, set for release in 2024, promises to bring Basil's grumpy genius into the modern age, though not everyone's convinced it's a good idea. Meanwhile, Connie Booth, who played the calm, resourceful Polly and co-wrote the original series with Cleas, her then-husband, chose a completely different path. After Fawlty Towers, Booth quietly stepped away from the spotlight and pursued a career in psychotherapy. No press tours, no fan events, just a clean break from the chaos of entertainment. Her decision surprised many, especially given how central she was to the show's brilliance. But it's clear she found peace where Basil never could. Prunella Scales, unforgettable as the razor-tongued Sybil Fawlty, proved equally enduring. She went on to appear in celebrated films like Howard's End in 1992 and numerous television dramas. Though her performances stayed sharp, real life eventually dealt her a cruel hand. In recent years, Scales has been battling vascular dementia. Her husband, fellow actor Timothy West, has spoken tenderly about her fading memory, but also her enduring wit. Even as time steals parts of her past, the warmth she shared with fans continues to shine through. For Andrew Sachs, the lovable yet endlessly tormented Manuel, Fawlty Towers marked both a high point and a physically demanding chapter. Sachs suffered real injuries on set, including a nasty bruise from a frying pan and burns from a kitchen scene gone wrong, but he never let it show. His dedication made Manuel one of British TV's most cherished characters. Sachs continued to act in popular series like Coronation Street and Doctor Who, before sadly passing away in 2016 after his own battle with dementia. Some cast members, like Ballard Berkeley, who played the doddering Major Gowan, left their mark early. Berkeley's portrayal of the eccentric ex-military man, full of outdated views and unexpected zingers, wouldn't pass today's filters. But that's precisely what made the character so memorable. Berkeley passed in 1988, leaving behind a legacy that has outlasted the political correctness of changing times. Brian Hall brought flair and a bit of kitchen anarchy as Terry the chef, though he appeared in fewer episodes. After Fawlty Towers, he kept working in television and film until his passing in 1997. Similarly, Jilly Flower and Renee Roberts, the elderly pair Miss Tibbs and Miss Gatsby, proved how even smaller roles can steal hearts. The two actresses continued acting well into their later years before Flower's death in 2009 and Roberts's in 2010. Their quirky affection for Basil added a layer of charm to the already chaotic hotel. As for the future of Fawlty Towers, the planned 2024 reboot has sparked debate. Can a show so deeply rooted in 1970s humor survive the modern world's sensitivities? That's the gamble John Cleas seems eager to take. But whether the revival flourishes or flops, the original remains untouched, lightning in a bottle that defined a genre. Its magic wasn't just in the jokes, but in the passion of a cast who gave everything they had, both on screen and beyond the curtain. But what do you think? Can the quirky brilliance and sharp humor of Fawlty Towers still thrive in today's ultra-sensitive world? Or is this reboot a recipe for disaster? We'd like to hear your take, so don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.